What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Andrew White, and Andrew, or Andy, I think is how you like to be referred to, right?
Sure.
Uh, Andy is heavily involved in responding to and debunking a bunch of pseudo archaeological claims. These would be claims like ancient aliens and Atlantis and other things of that nature, which I've encountered a few times in like debates and all that kind of stuff when I was doing more flat Earth kind of response and things of that nature. But Andy, do you want to tell everybody kind of like who you are, what you do, and tell them about your channel and everything?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on. You and I met at BajaCon, which was in Ontario back in just a couple weeks ago, I guess. And that was a great opportunity for me, I think, to try to talk about some of the overlap between ideas about religion and the power of religion in people's lives and religious ideas and the history of pseudoarchaeology, which these things are intertwined and in a lot of really nasty ways, which I tried to convey and which I don't think people are aware of. So I'm a professional archaeologist. What I do is I try to get the past right because I think the past is important. The human past is important. So it bothers me when people get it wrong on purpose for various agendas. So it's not my full-time job, but over the course of my career, I've tried to take time where I can to address some of these things and to try to explain to people, A, why it's important to get the past right, and B, how we know what we know and how we know that a lot of these ideas are wrong. So, I'm in my mid-50s. I've been doing this for 30 years now in the field and in the laboratory. Did my undergrad work in Indiana. Got my master's in Illinois. Went to Michigan and got my PhD there. Worked mostly in Eastern North America. I've also worked in the Pacific and in Europe doing actual real archaeology. So the pseudoarchaeology stuff is a sideline, but an important one.
Yeah, and you've got a YouTube channel called Nobody Listens to Andrew, right?
Correct. And it's very small because actually nobody does listen to me. I try. It's the voice I have. I used to write a blog as my kind of main way of communicating these things, but I realized that a lot of the center of gravity of the discussions was going on video on YouTube. So that's why I switched. My blog is still up. It still has a lot of what I think is pretty good work on it, that talks about these things. But I've taken to trying to communicate on video. And I think that a lot of the people that watch my channel or find it are people that disagree with me, which is good. I get a lot of angry comments and angry emails because people don't like to be told that they're wrong, because a lot of the pseudoarchaeology stuff actually is, it's a lot more of a belief system than it is science. It's belief pretending to be science, which is what kind of rankles me and agitates me and wants me to talk about it. You already said that. The channel is called Nobody Listens to Andrew. That's I took that from a book that I had as a kid. I should have brought that with me. That was called Nobody Listens to Andrew, and it's this kid who keeps trying to get people to listen to him and nobody does, because that was a running joke in my family because I was the youngest of the two kids and I always felt like nobody listened to me. If anybody out there is the younger one, you totally get it. So I decided I was just going to own it, and nobody listens to me, and that's okay. I'm still going to say what I'm going to say.
No, that's good. I'm glad. I'm glad that doesn't stop you from standing up, using your voice against all this all of this pseudo archaeological nonsense. Which I wanted to comment on, like the faith-based nature of a lot of these conspiracies, because I noticed that in the flat Earth community too, is that they had more of a faith-based sort of connection to the idea that the Earth is flat rather than like a scientifically informed one,
Yeah, I mean, one of the hallmarks of science is that there has to be a way to prove your idea wrong, or else it's not a scientific idea. It has to be falsifiable. At least that's how people think of classic science. So if you go in with an idea and you say, there is nothing that is going to change my mind about this, then it's really hard to have a conversation with that person. So one of the first questions I often ask is, like, what would you accept as evidence that's going to prove your idea wrong? And if they can't think of one, then we're kind of done. Like, we're not going to be able to have a conversation if we can't even agree on what constitutes evidence or logic or anything else. And like, I mean, flat Earth is pretty dumb, right? Like, there's, at least in a lot of the pseudoarchaeology, like, we're talking about, this really well machined vase. How is it made with the technology that we think they had, or how do they build the pyramids? Or there's like concrete material things that we're talking about, like the flat Earth stuff. It's like the evidence is so overwhelmingly obvious that idea is wrong that, like, I really question where those people are coming from and how they can hold on to that. So, God bless you for trying to talk some sense into them. And yes, I'm saying that with my tongue in my cheek, but you know what
yeah. I actually I gave up like on doing that, because I did that for like maybe 1 to 2 years, like responding to flat Earth kind of stuff, and it just got to the point where it's like repetitive, like, oh, I've already said this like so many times, and like I guess I understand, like, so I get that too with my my religious response videos and everything. Like, I have to repeat the same things over and over again, but I feel like the flat Earth and I guess the pseudo archaeological stuff is like so dumb that like you shouldn't need to like beat a dead horse, but it seems like for a lot of people you do.
Yeah, and like, I've struggled with that because it's exhausting. I mean, like, it's exhausting to have the same argument over and over and over again. And that you're right, and that you've got a good, strong, clean argument. And so, like, there have been points in my life where, like, I've just kind of held up my hand and I put myself on the bench and I'm like, I got to step away from this because it's driving me crazy. Like, I taught a course in this stuff. When I was at South Carolina, I structured it as a critical thinking course. So we would look at these different issues, and I'd ask the students to figure out, like, what's the history of this idea? How do you know whether it's right or you're wrong? Why do people believe this? And, they'd use it as a way to write and think about things. But you just get, like, you going over the same stuff and having that same argument. It not only does it get tiring, like, it gets boring. Like, it's not interesting after a while. But, I feel like it's still important. So if I can find a way to keep myself interested in it, like I try to just keep after it. And the reason is, there are some people's minds who you're never going to change. But if you put out resources like blog posts or videos, and somebody comes along who's genuinely curious, they might find that, and they might be exposed to a perspective that they're not going to get from Graham Hancock, or somebody who's trying to sell a product, like a real slick packaged, view of the past that is completely wrong. So being able to act as a backstop to some unknown person out there who might find something of value in it, like, that's kind of what I hold on to. It's like, maybe I am doing good, even if it doesn't feel like it, even if it feels like a slog, just to kind of be there and to create a resource. And there are more and more professional archaeologists who are doing that. Still not enough, but there's a lot of folks out there who have, I think, come to the realization, or would agree, that it is important to have a voice in it, because not saying anything, I think, is read by a lot of people as assent or validation. You're by not putting out an argument against it and not having that available, like, you're kind of ceding the battlefield and going, okay, you're right. At least that's how it's read by some, which I think is a problem.
No, yeah, I can totally see how that would be a problem, and I'm glad that you kind of brought this up, like you teaching about all of this as more of a critical thinking sort of exercise, because my first questions for you today are really just about like how lay people can interact with these kind of topics, because I feel like a lot of lay people, they see things like that Netflix show Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock, and they hear these fantastical stories, and like immediately in the series, because my wife and I started watching it, and I'm like, there's a lot of red flags that are going off here as soon as they started talking about stuff. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the key warning signs that should make lay people skeptical of archaeological claims they encounter, like in media or in online spaces?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think I will start off trying to form an answer to that by saying that I think archaeologists, like, we have a great product. You know, people are interested in the past and archaeology, like, naturally. We don't have to stoke that. What we have done wrong is not packaged what we know and how we do how we get to what we know in a way that, like, the public can easily digest. So it's easy for guys like Graham Hancock to come in. He's a very good communicator. He's a smooth talker. He sounds good. And you put high production values behind that. And it's easy to create a package for his ideas or claims that is much easier to swallow than a bunch of, like, technical reports that archaeologists put out, you know, many of which are behind paywalls and people can't get to them. So we don't do a good job, I think, of putting out our own message in a competing format, or one that is as easily digestible as popular media. And the media does a bad job of covering us too, because they like to emphasize the sensational. You know, it's the top 10 discoveries of 2025, or it's the most fabulous thing that happened. So people get this idea in their head that this is how the science is done. This is how archaeology is done. You go out and you get your bullwhip and your fedora on, and, you know, you go and you discover stuff and you raid tombs and things like that. And that's really not how it's done at all. And we've done a bad job of countering that also. So I guess, what should a layperson do to decide, you know, whether something is credible or not? I think the first question they have to ask is, or the first thing they have to be willing to do is to ask whether this is credible or not, because people are so often willing to sit there and just kind of take it and accept it. And another thing that the alternative side has done very well is to cultivate a distrust in academia and the elite. And that goes with a lot of other things in our culture right now. You know, it's the scientists that are hiding things from you, and there's a conspiracy, and, like, that's a big part of their argument. But the internet is out there, and we all have access to so much more information than we used to. And it is possible to scratch these claims really not very much at all and figure out whether they're right or they're wrong if you just do a little bit of homework. So I think we need to instill in the public this idea that they don't have to trust either quote unquote side. You know, the pseudoarchaeologists are setting this up as a battle. And you have to trust us and not them, and you can't trust them for all these reasons. But people can go out, you know, we hear this mantra all the time: do your own research, do your own research. Well, you can do your own research. A lot of the pseudoarchaeology claims that I investigate, like, it just takes a couple of Google searches. That's it. And you can figure out, like, where these things came from or what got wrong. You know, some of them require a little bit more technical knowledge or digging deeper to figure things out. But a lot of it, you can do it. Anybody can do it. So somewhere, I feel like as a society, we have kind of, like, lost that spirit of, you know, embracing skepticism, going, well, really? How do you know? How do you know? And being able to figure that out for ourselves. And I wish that we could get that back. The tools are there. You know, everybody has a keyboard and a smartphone now. Like, you can dig down and you can get answers. Why people don't want to, I think, is a valid, interesting question too. So.
Well, I think that people want to believe that there's still something out there that we can discover as far as, like, archaeology goes. Like, I understand, like, there's vast amounts of things that we just don't know, like, even about archaeology and prior civilizations and everything. But I think that there's a lot of people out there that want to believe in fantastical things, but they want it to be backed by, like, science. And so I feel like maybe the motivation is people just latch on to anything that seems, you know, to be backed by science initially. I was just thinking, though, that it reminds me of your video you did some months back where Graham Hancock was, I believe he was on Joe Rogan, and he says, I don't lie. I would love for somebody to find, a time when I've directly lied or something like that. And you pulled up a really good example of the whole idea of squaring the circle and everything. And I feel like the thread that you start pulling on that is just looking up what is squaring the circle, because it's so obvious if you look at what squaring the circle is, that's not what Graham Hancock was talking about. And the fact that he got that wrong either says that he's lying or he's just so woefully misinformed on the subject he's supposedly an expert in that, there's just, that seems highly unlikely kind of thing.
Yeah. So one of my strategies that I use, again, when people come at me with a bunch of claims, they say the evidence for this advanced ice age civilization is so overwhelming. There's so much evidence. And I say, give me one. Give me your best piece of evidence. And let's talk about one thing. Because really all it takes is one really good piece of evidence, right? That's all you need. So when somebody like Graham Hancock says, show me an example of where I did this, it's okay, well, here's one. What do you say to that? And the answer is crickets. Nothing. Mm-hmm. He has stopped saying that. He has changed his language a little bit to where well, it's not quite squaring the circle, but it almost is. They're doing sophisticated things. And I showed in some video years ago when I first came across him saying that you can make those figures that circle inside a square with a straight edge and a ruler. That's it. Or yeah. So if you took, I'm trying to remember exactly how you do it, but if you can draw a circle, right? If you're out in the woods and you have a stick and a rope, you tie the rope onto the stick and you drag it around and you make a circle. And then you can make a square really easily from that by having a certain length, and you can go out and and you can connect them, and that's it. You don't have to be able to calculate the area. You don't have to need to know pi or any of that stuff. So the reason he says those things is because he's trying to say that there is evidence for all this advanced mathematics all over the world that has to come from a single source. So it's important to his argument. And if you can shoot down that one piece of it, then where does the argument then stand? If I can go do this in my backyard, or an elementary school kid can do this, it's not that it's not impressive that these things were still built, but the idea that it takes some kind of mathematics that would have had to have been, developed and curated over generations of a civilization, it's nonsense. It's total nonsense. And so you can flick that little leg of the stool out of the way. And you do that enough times and eventually there's nothing there anymore. So he kind of can't, I think, admit either of those two alternatives, that he doesn't know what he's talking about or that that's not true. So he just moves on and keeps telling the story in some other way. And because people don't think about it critically, it doesn't matter. They just let it slide.
Yeah. And we've kind of already, my next question in my list here, on this particular topic, I think that we've kind of already covered it, but I just to double check to see if there's anything else. But when somebody makes an extraordinary claim like Graham Hancock has here, well, what are there any other questions that anybody should be asking so that they can more properly evaluate these kinds of claims?
Are there any other claims that somebody should be asking? I mean, I think
questions.
Yeah. I think, when I hear a claim that sounds off to me, or that sounds weird, that sounds spectacular, I first try to define what it is. What is this person saying? What exactly is he claiming? And then I try to figure out what their evidence is. What is the support for that? And oftentimes it's just an assertion. The pyramids couldn't possibly have been built because they're just too large or complicated or sophisticated or whatever. What's the evidence behind that? So I think it's important for people not to kind of be dazzled by the claim and to realize that if it's just an assertion, that you're allowed as a critical person to go, you know what? That's your claim. You've got to back that up. And if you're not backing it up, then I'm not going to accept it. Because you can say anything you want. And in science, you can assert anything you want, but it all comes down to like whether you can back it up or not. Like, what's the evidence for that? What are the pros and the cons? Like, what makes sense with that claim and what doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
So define what the claim is, see what the evidence is, and then if you're curious, go try to find where that claim originates. Did this person make it up, or does it have a long history? And that's where you get back into a lot of things. Like, a lot of these claims go back to the mid 1800s, especially. Some of them go back to the early colonial period. Claims about white Europeans being responsible for all the civilizations in the world, like those go back to the mid 1500s, like basically really soon after the New World was quote unquote discovered by the Spanish and the Portuguese. They were claiming that the civilizations there must have been, Europeans. They couldn't have possibly been the natives. So to me, I think that's what's interesting about, like, not only can you show that the claims are baloney, but you trace out where those ideas come from, and you get like into the history of them, and you start to realize that these folks today who are peddling this stuff really aren't doing much that's original at all. They're just kind of recycling stuff from the Victorian period and maybe putting a new sheen on it with, some fancy scientific terms or knowledge that they didn't have in the 1800s. But it's basically the same story. And when you see people recycling things that have been around for a long time and have been shown to be false over and over and over again, that should reduce your confidence in their conclusions and their ability to do research and think in original ways. So I would suggest clarify the claim, look at the evidence that support it, and try to understand the history of it, and you will learn a lot by doing that.
And I guess would you say that the way that people can distinguish between legitimate archaeological discoveries that challenge our current existing knowledge from these pseudo archaeological claims would be whether or not that evidence truly does support the conclusion, right?
Yeah, and again, I think you get into a problem because a lot of the less spectacular archaeological claims, the public doesn't really care about. And a lot of the hard work of that is done in labs and in the field over decades, and it's in reports that are behind paywalls that you can't see. But when people make a big, bold claim, that involves material evidence, which is what archaeology studies, like if there's an artifact or a structure or something, like you should be able to find something out about that that's independent of the person making the claim about it. Like, the pyramids exist. The temples in Cambodia exist. The Mayan ruins exist. And there's a lot of scholarship on those. It doesn't have anything to do with Graham Hancock or any of these other folks. So that's out there. So when they make a claim about them, go find other sources that talk about those same things. Go, see what their sources are and go try to track those down and read them and see where they got them. Like, that's kind of basic scholarship 101, is you just try to track these things out and you run them to ground and you see where they originated. And whether they seem like people who are doing valid work or not. And if it's the same three guys that are citing each other in like a circular firing squad about this, then that's a red flag. So yeah.
Yeah. And speaking about all of this, I'm wondering, before we get into the more specific areas, can you kind of explain like how legitimate archaeological research works, and how do archaeologists test hypotheses and validate findings? I don't know if you can kind of summarize, your entire field here in just like a minute or so, but
sure, no problem.
Yeah.
2 words, very slowly for the most part.
Yeah.
This stuff moves along. This whole idea that, you grab your bullwhip and you go out and you discover a temple that's never been entered before. Like, shit like that happens sometimes. Like, there are like spectacular things that happen that people stumble across that are amazing, and they add like a richness to our data and what we know. But a lot of the work of science, and archaeology is a science, is, gathering information, making an interpretation, figuring out how you're going to test that interpretation, figuring out whether your interpretation is right or wrong, figuring out what's wrong with it, and then redoing it and making another interpretation, and you go around in this loop. And that can take generations. There are problems that people have been thinking about since the 1800s that like we still haven't figured out good answers to, because guess what? Human beings are really, really hard to study, and it's really, really hard to study them in the past when all you have is little bits of trash and, deserted buildings and things like that are left. So it's tricky, and it takes a long time, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't look good on camera. So we don't have, cameramen following us into our labs as I sit there and I type on the computer and I do a bunch of statistics to try to figure something out, or I look at a bunch of maps. Like, that's not exciting. So the public doesn't see that part of it. But, people go through this process of getting their degrees, their masters, or their dissertations, and they come up with project ideas like, how can I advance knowledge in this? What contribution can I make that I can take all these things and I can do this hard work for 5 years and figure out something that nobody ever knew before, and be able to make my case in such a way that a bunch of other smart people agree that like I've made a pretty good case, even if I haven't figured out anything. And like, that's kind of how science grinds on, and a lot of work in the United States, when we do archaeology here, gets funded kind of indirectly through the federal government by the permitting process for roads and bridges and strip mines and things like that. And there are cultural heritage protection laws and all that sort of thing. And so like, there's a lot of basic work that gets done that doesn't get incorporated into kind of our larger theories or ideas about how cultures change over time and space, for a long time. Like, it takes a long time for that to kind of move from the ground up and get incorporated into kind of a regional synthesis of things. So slowly is how it happens, and pretty meticulously. And there are a lot of specialists with their heads down in the lab trying to figure things out. And there are people with bigger questions, and there are a large diversity of ways to come at things, trying to find as many independent lines of evidence as you can to try to figure out what's the most credible among many possible explanations for how things got the way they are and how things changed. And so it's a difficult road that is not always, I think, very exciting. Unless you like watching paint dry or grass grow or things like that, then it's probably scintillating to watch. But when you see them, show archaeologists on shows, like, they very quickly get bored with the pace at which they do things. So they cut away and they go do something else while somebody's sitting there, taking notes and troweling or whatever, because that's what it is. It's hard and it's slow, but ultimately rewarding if you stick with it. And it's great to, when you come up with something like, nobody has ever said this before, and I think that I can make a good case for this, and this solves problem X, Y, and Z. That's a pretty good feeling. But if you don't have patience and all you want to do is sell books, you're not interested in that for the most part.
Yeah, and speaking of patience and selling books and everything like that, I wanted to shift, I guess, our conversation to some of these more specific pseudo-archaeological claims. My first set of questions that I have is over Ancient Aliens. Currently, Ancient Aliens is in its 18th season, which is just mind-blowing to me. But in your view, what makes these extraterrestrial theories so appealing to the general public?
I don't know. Let me think about that before I just blow it off. Like, it's another one of those things where, like, it's so stupid. And it really, Ancient Aliens is basically Ancient Aryans from space. Like, that's it. It's the same. It's all the same Atlantis stuff. It's the idea that, you go in with the assumption that indigenous cultures couldn't possibly have built these things. So what is our other explanation for it? And then you start cherry picking and you find pieces of evidence that look like something, or you make them up if you have to. And the guy who came up with the Ancient Aliens thing, or who really popularized it, was Eric von Daniken back in the late 1960s. And I don't know whether he wrote parts of that book when he was in jail for embezzlement and fraud, or whether it was at some other time, but like, he was not an honest person. He kind of, this current crop of people that's on that show, like, those are kind of his disciples, Georgios Tsoukalos and things like that. And they're, he's a cultural phenomenon. Like, the guy has been memed, the whole thing with, aliens. I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. Yeah, like, they know what they're doing. Like, they're not idiots. They get it, and they have tapped into something and also helped breed this, this contempt of academics, or this distrust And again, like I think that articulates with a lot of other things that are going on in our society and culture that like that's probably a tailwind for that sort of thing, that it's just kind of out there now that like people are hiding things from you. You know, we're not going to somehow the government is hiding the true shape of the earth from you, as well as, you know, our past is not evolution. It was a young earth, and, you know, we were created just as we are today. And like all these things are kind of rely on the public not wanting to believe the story that they're told. And you know, we as a society have fallen for it. Like we have taken it hook, line, and sinker. So what is it, like half the population now believes this stuff, and you know, your guess is as good as mine. If I could figure out the silver bullet to make people go, you know what, this is really dumb, I would fire it in a second. But I don't have it either. I don't know why it's such a cultural phenomena. You know, you mentioned that maybe people just want to believe in something fantastic, and I guess I can sympathize with that a little bit. But at some point, like, doesn't the rubber hit the road and you realize like there's a reality here, and none of this, you know, makes any sense with like what I see, the way the world works on a day-to-day basis. So why is this important to me? And you tell me, Godless Engineer, you tell me why people like that stuff so much. I'm too jaded. I'm on the inside. Like I can't,
yeah.
I'm frustrated.
Well, I mean, I think that there's just a lot of people out there that feel like science and specifically archaeology is just such a daunting sort of field that you know they don't care to try to really understand like the intricacies of science and like how science is done and how critical thinking is important to it. And so like they hear fantastical claims, and as long as it has this sort of like facade of science behind it, I think that kind of like satisfies that inner need for it to appear scientific, and it allows them to believe in those fantastical things. Cause like, you know, a majority of America, at least, you know, they believe that angels are real and that Satan is like a real force that is, you know, accomplishing things in their daily lives. So like having some kind of, you know, fantastical thing out there that's like, oh, aliens visited us and created landing strips on plateaus. Like, I feel like that's something that's so inconsequential to their daily life that they don't mind believing in the fantastical things like that. And I mentioned that specifically because I was thinking about like, I've watched a few episodes of Ancient Aliens, and like one of them was like, I don't know how to pronounce his name, the alien guy. He was like, he had this picture of a plateau, and he was like, you see this plateau here? Well, it's perfectly cut on top, so that must mean it's a landing pad or like a landing strip or something like that. And I'm like, it's just a plateau. Like, plateaus are all over the place. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? And it's just I guess it still amazes me that people are so easily fooled by faux science. They just don't seem to care like about what real science does, like how the scientific method is actually done. And I don't think that any of those shows actually showcase any actual use of the scientific method.
No, not at all. And again, I think we come back to the question of like, it has to be a belief system at some level, or at least I think that's a fair way to characterize it, because you're not like they people want to believe in that stuff so bad that it doesn't matter what kind of, you know, dog crap evidence they throw out there. They just lap it up. They can't wait to eat it. And there are so many of all the pieces of dog crap, like they're not even consistent with each other. So like, yeah, you know, we need to level off a whole entire mountaintop in Peru or Bolivia or whatever in order for this spacecraft to land on a landing strip. That was the idea in the 1960s. Well, since then, you know, now they're interdimensional beings and they can time travel and they can do this. So why the fuck are they coming here in like some humongous spaceship that needs to land on top of a mountain? Like, it doesn't make any sense, but that never clicks. You know, and again, like I go back to the question, like, okay, what is the single best? You can't tell me that all these aliens were coming here and they're mining gold and they're messing with our DNA and all this other kind of stuff. Like, and they left not a single piece of alien garbage or technology behind. They just left some buildings and some carved rocks and some straight lines and rocks and things like that. So what is the single best piece of evidence for any of this? Give me one. What's the best one? Because believe me, I would, if there were evidence of a spacecraft from another planet that came here in 10,000 BC, I would love that shit. Like, that would be great. But find me a nut or a bolt or something from it in context, in an archaeological context, that can't be explained any other way. And I am all over it. Because you know what? There's probably alien life out there. It makes total sense, mathematically and statistically, and with all the planets and all that and the equations. But you still got to have evidence for it, right? You can't just assume, and you can't assume that they were down here messing around with it. So give me one piece of evidence. And I don't know what they would say to that. What's the best one? And it's some big rock, probably the temple in Baalbek, Lebanon, that has really big stones that were moved to make a retaining wall. And, people couldn't possibly have done that. Well, yes, they could. They did. There it is. The Romans did it. We know the Romans did it because there's Roman remains underneath it. So unless the aliens came and, then the Romans dug a tunnel and put their stuff underneath it, they built that wall there. They built that temple. So, what else you got at that point? I just don't, it's so incredibly weak that it has to be a belief system at some level. People want to believe it. And again, I get it. I would like for it to be true, but as a scientist, I can't base anything on that. I can't base any conclusion on the fact that I want something to be true. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm glad that you brought up what kind of evidence do they have, because I have a list. So the first one I want to talk about.
I will do my best. There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. So the first one is the Nazca Lines in Peru. This is a favorite example by Ancient Aliens. They claim that the only way that those lines could be drawn were if you were in a spacecraft or something like that, looking above and directing entities below to draw them out perfectly. And so I'm kind of curious, what's your take on it? What does the actual evidence say as far as how those lines were created?
So as far as how they were created, it's easy physically because there's this, whatever it's called, desert varnish. The rocks have a certain color and you flip them over and then the color changes. So that's how they would mechanically alter things. There's a paper that came out, I would have known this last year, but I don't anymore. Sometime in the 2000s, I think, where they looked at a lot of them. And my memory is they were all visible from some nearby mountain peak or hillside or something like that. So the idea that you have to be in the air to see them is nonsense. They were visible from places on the ground and discernible as to what they were supposed to be. And the idea that you would need, that they were so large that humans couldn't have made those without some kind of sophisticated technology or direction is also nonsense. There was another paper or an experiment, I can't remember which because you put me on the spot, but they drew a scale plan and then measured it out on the ground by whatever pacing or ropes or something, and were able to recreate that using basically super simple technology and just scaling it up in a way that no single person on the ground could see it while they were doing it, but they still managed to do it accurately. Mm-hmm. So the claim goes away, and that yes, you can see them from the ground. Yeah, they're they're impressive, but they're not impossible for people to make with really simple technology. And you would have to understand the context of the religion and society, I guess, to understand the why. But you explained to me why we need a big monkey or a hummingbird to kind of draw the aliens in from outer space and tell them where to land. They don't know. They just crossed all these galaxies and they need some piece of art in the desert to welcome them somehow. That also makes no sense. So they were, something culturally that was done within the technology that was available at the time for some reason that, part of which is probably lost to history, but humans do stuff. Humans do stuff that seems weird to other humans, and they're amazing, but they're not evidence of any kind of alien intervention to me at all. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point that you brought up. Like, why would aliens come here to like direct either people or other aliens to like just basically draw graffiti on the ground? Like, and it's not even impressive graffiti. Like, as far as like from the perspective of like some kind of advanced civilization, right? You would think that if they are some kind of advanced civilization, then they would be able to carve more intricately designed like art pieces or whatnot that are like very so far past like the current I guess artistic ability of anybody in that area. You would like I would think that that would be good evidence of like, oh yeah, there's something else amiss here. But it's like aliens come by to draw these rudimentary like shapes of animals and shit. Like I don't I guess I don't that's a
Yeah.
good point to bring up.
Are the aliens drawing them? Are the people drawing them in honor of the aliens? Like, why do the aliens need to see a big spider? I don't know. I don't know.
Can you imagine the aliens coming by and like the humans are like, we drew this for you, and they're like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's
Let
kind
me,
of
let me
like
put that on the refrigerator with a magnet. Like, that's great.
that's that's
I
so
mean,
good. We're so
and
happy.
again, like I I'm not trying to like denigrate indigenous culture or art or anything at all, but like there's just such a mismatch between blah 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 mismatch between the supposed sophisticated alien origin and then what you're actually seeing. And I think that the Nazca lines were one of the first things in a pre-Daniken book, like in the late 40s or 50s. Somebody pointed that out, and I wish I could remember the guy's name, and I can't. Uh, pointed them out as like maybe this is evidence of some kind of alien intervention or lost technology or something like that. And it's because like people flew over them in a plane and realized what they were for the first time. So maybe that history has something to do with it too. It's like, well, I'm seeing these from a plane. How could you possibly see them from the ground? And nobody ever really thought to check. Well, actually, you can see them from the ground if you're in the right spot. So
Yeah. I get how maybe what I was saying about the aliens and whatnot was a bit denigrating to like indigenous populations, but no, I guess I just meant from like the perspective of the aliens, because you would think that the aliens would be so far advanced and everything like that. Like it seems like a child's drawing, but I
yeah,
totally agree that like their ability to do that was pretty impressive for that time. And I mean, I think that the Nazca lines are impressive just in general, just to
yeah, no,
clarify for everybody watching.
yeah, no, I think that's good. They're super cool, but it's another like every time people somewhere around the world other than Europe do something that's super cool, these folks want to swoop in and say that they couldn't possibly have done that. That must have been aliens. It must have been the ancient Atlanteans. It must have been, some kind of white ancestor race or the giants or the Nephilim or whatever. So you can't make a circle of rocks on the ground and not have somebody else claim it. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and my next question is kind of we've already sort of answered it. It's about the megalithic constructions, like at Puma Punku. That I mean, I've heard a lot about that, and I feel like everybody knows that we can, humans at that time had the technology to move, giant stones. I mean, that's been demonstrated a lot. But I'm kind of curious, like, whenever you hear somebody out there that's like, oh, this is a giant structure, there's no way this could be moved by humans, like what's your initial reaction whenever you hear that now, considering that you've been dealing with this for a long time? Like do you just sort of laugh to yourself about it, or like do you what's your reaction?
I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that I think it's pretty easy to demonstrate that humans have the capacity to move big rocks around. And it's easy to demonstrate because we see it all the time in the past. Like there are really big rocks that have been moved by cultures who we understand like through their writings or historic, like the Egyptians moved tons of big rocks around and we have drawings of how they did it. We have, depictions of the boats. We understand how they could carve an obelisk and how they could maneuver the boat underneath it and carry it and move it. And then we know the Romans transported those same things, to take them from Egypt and bring them to Rome and erect them. We have ethnographic examples of living cultures in Indonesia today who are moving big rocks around as part of a traditional ceremony where they go out and they quarry a big stone and they get however many guys it takes, sometimes hundreds, and these big ropes that they're making out of vines, and they pull those suckers along the road to erect them somewhere. And it's like, the ceremonies have to do with mobilizing a lot of labor, which is part of prestige. So like, how many people can I pull together and feed for a couple days to quarry and move this stone? And that stone becomes a symbol of the effort that you could put into that and the labor that you can mobilize, which is a sign of status, right? So like, that's one of the reasons why people do these things. So not only can we see examples of big rocks that have been moved, but we have ethnographic data that demonstrates the motivation behind that sometimes. And we understand that it can be done with really simple technology. There's a guy who built like the Coral Castle thing in Florida, where he built this incredible stone structure all by himself with some really simple tools, lifting some pretty big rocks. There's a guy, I think it was in Michigan, who basically was showing how he could build Stonehenge on his own in his backyard by using really simple levers and counterweights. So we fall into this trap, I think, with all of our technology now and hydraulics and everything, thinking there's no way people could have done this in the past. There's no way they could have moved that stone. Where actually, yeah, they could, and they did. Like, it's right there. And, I would turn the question around and say, I can give you plenty of reasons or explanations of how that was done. Why don't you give me evidence of that it wasn't humans that did that, other than that it's a big rock? Because I can provide the context. It's like, yeah, we can move big rocks. We could do it today. So why don't you tell me what it is about that, other than the size of the rock, that makes you think that there's no way humans could have done that? And like these remains, like Puma Punku or Tiwanaku, or the pyramids, or big megaliths in Europe, even during the Ice Age, or sorry, not the Ice Age, the early Holocene. They're really, really super impressive. But humans do impressive stuff. So it kind of, again, boggles my mind that people would immediately jump to some explanation that is not required at all for that. And, you ask the question, why? Why are you so eager to take achievements away from people and hand them to some extraterrestrial species or some supernatural phenomenon? And I just don't get it.
Yeah, it seems incredibly denigrating to like human ingenuity, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess denigrating and like just ignorant. And you'll hear Von Daniken say things like, there's no crane today that could have moved this rock. Like, we could not possibly do this today. And so you look up the stone, how many tons is it? And you look up, world's largest cranes, and it's like, yeah, we've got a crane that can move that rock. Sure, like you could go rent that. You could go rent that crane. You could go move that rock if you wanted to. And people say, like, we could not build the pyramids today. It's like, yeah, we could. Sure, we could. It would take a while and it would be really expensive, but we could totally do that. And I think that they also sell short, especially these archaic states and empires, like the amount of labor that they could capitalize, human labor, to do ego-based projects that took a long time and took a lot of patience and skill. Like, people, I think, don't quite appreciate the power that some of those rulers had to be able to do that sort of thing. And so, they'll scratch their heads and go, well, why would they have done that? And they couldn't possibly have done that. It's like, yeah, I kind of understand why. And like, yeah, they totally could have. And they did. And we have multiple lines of evidence that show why they did or how they did it. So.
Yeah. And then the final thing to close out this conversation on ancient aliens, I know that a lot of them like to point as pieces of evidence, point to like either textual representations or like images on like stones and carvings and all that represent like, UFOs or something. What's your take on that? Like whenever somebody points that out, like, what do you think about those claims?
There's a variety of those. Some are misinterpretations or misunderstandings of what they're looking at, like the Palenque tomb, which is the Mayan tomb that has the spaceman supposedly in a rocket. If you study Mayan iconography, which I don't, but I've read from people who do, it's a depiction of the tree of life, which was this symbol that's in a lot of their iconography and their cosmology and that sort of thing. So if you understand it in context, it becomes pretty obvious what it is, and it is not a spacecraft, and it's not supposed to be a spacecraft. There's an example that I still see of these hieroglyphics that appear to be like a helicopter or a land speeder or a submarine or something like that. And you can find online really easily now, because people have put out these resources, that it's an example of one set of hieroglyphs being transposed over another. And to our eyes, like, that looks like a helicopter. But if you see the two different layers of hieroglyphics, it becomes obvious what it is. And people who can read hieroglyphics will tell you that. And they can explain that to you. But, the ancient aliens folks don't want to know that, because it plinks out one of their little pieces of evidence. There's a model of a wooden bird from Egypt, the Saqqara bird. It's a model of it's a bird. Like, if every model of a bird meant that I had a spacecraft, that you had spacecraft, there's like these little gold pins from Peru, the Tolima pins or something, and you can pick out a few of them that look like they have wings. But if you look at all of them, they're all of like insects and fish. They're all like the native fauna that live in that area. So if you want to be selective and pick these things out, you can make a case. But it's not a good case. They're not being honest. They're just selectively finding things to support an idea they already have. And another thing about, things like, maybe not so much with ancient aliens, but things like rock inscriptions and stuff like that. You'll see people basing a lot of false claims about the past on carved stones that some farmer dug up, or carvings in a cave, stuff that is actually like really easy for you or I to do. You and I could go out with a penknife and carve something on a rock. Men from Mars were here in 1592 BC, and of course that would make no sense, but you would find somebody who wanted to claim that as evidence. So things without context is what I'm getting at. Like, these isolated things in the world of archaeology, they don't mean nothing, but they are much, much less valuable to us than something that has a context that we can date securely. If we found a depiction of a UFO down, buried in an archaeological stratum in a cave that was sealed since 8000 BC, and we could date it, like, that would be an artifact to take seriously. But that's not where these things come from. It's like, oh, I dug this up on my farm. Here it is. And it's got a picture of, the gray aliens with the whatever. It's like, so a lot of the stuff is fake too. So if you don't have evidence, you make it up, or people see that there's a market for it, and so they will make things and sell them. And that has happened to a lot of these guys who want to promote this stuff. They're so eager to have that evidence that they will accept almost anything. So it's up to the viewer, I think, and those of us who give a crap about this, to hold up your hand and say, wait a second, let's look into this one a little bit more.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, like, I'm keep comparing it to the religious iconography that have been found, like the religious artifacts that are supposedly, like pieces of Jesus's cross or the Shroud of Turin. I mean, it's kind of what I'm seeing similarities there, because, like, with the Shroud of Turin, for instance, it just shows up like in the late 13th, early 14th century. And it's just purported to be the burial shroud. And it's not like, we can't source it anywhere. Just some dude shows up with it one day, is like, look, burial shroud of Jesus. And then, of course, you've got the pieces of the true cross that are all over the place. And there's even one place, not just one place, there's multiple places that have Jesus's supposed foreskin. And so it's kind of like all of these things just sort of appear by basically a farmer finding it out in a field, just like, oh, look, I found this foreskin randomly. Don't ask where it came from, but it came from Jesus. And it's kind of similar in that way, because, it's not like we're actually finding like the Shroud of Turin wrapped up that's been sealed up in a tomb since the 1st century. It's some random dude showed up with it, and we're just supposed to take him at his word for it, right? And so I see a lot of similarities there.
Yeah. And getting back to your question on how archaeology is actually done. So, like, that context is super, super important. So people show up throughout the course of my career. People have come in with boxes of rocks that are just rocks and they're nothing, and they swear that they are something. Or On the pseudoarchaeology side, like it's always like, somebody brings in something like you were just saying, and they want to build all of this scaffolding and interpretation on it. Whereas your first question should be like, is that a real thing? What confidence can I place in that artifact? And there's all kinds of ideas about people, Europeans especially, coming to North America before Columbus. And like we know the Vikings came, or the Norse came in like the 1100s or something like that. I forget the dates, because we have actual evidence. We've got an archaeological site in Newfoundland. It's got houses and artifacts and stuff like that. But almost every other piece of evidence for that is just it's carved rocks, and it's other things that are completely out of context. And when I have people accuse all archaeologists of hiding all of this evidence that, the lost tribes of Israel were in North America, or all these other things, it's like, I've been doing this for 30 years, excavating on archaeological sites where you get past the disturbed layer and you get down into like a fire pit or a storage pit that was used 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago or whatever. And everything in that pit, other than stuff that maybe like the worms brought in, all the big artifacts, like that's where they are. That's where they were left there by somebody at that moment when that pit was sealed up. That's good context. That's how we learn about life and everyday activities. And I've been digging those things for 30 years now. And I've been digging through soils that no one has looked at since they were covered over. I have never found anything like that. And none of my colleagues or friends has found anything that would suggest any kind of those contexts took place. So when you actually get rid of all of the chaff and you look at the wheat, which is the stuff in context, like that's where you're going to learn the story. And all this other stuff is noise, and it's bullshit, and it's people with an agenda who want something to be true, who are elevating those up into the discussion. And it gets frustrating because, as I've said before, like we have done a poor job of communicating to the public, like why this is good evidence and this is not. And you should pay a lot more attention to this than you do to this. So yeah. And I've never heard of the Jesus foreskin being found in a farmer's field, but that does not surprise me one bit. Of course not. Of course that's where you're going to find it, right? That's where the most important things are found. Some guy just found it.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't know where the foreskins were found. I was trying to draw
foreskins. There's more than one. How many are there? How many are we talking about here? A lot.
Oh, there's hold on. There's a lot. Let's see how many. I can't remember, but there's more than one of the foreskin. Jesus foreskins are there. Let's see. There's been between 8. Well, no, they're not. they're actual skin. I think so. Between 8 and potentially over 21 different foreskin relics exist, scattered across like Europe and stuff. So, like, yeah.
How did it get? I'm just trying to wrap my head around. I mean, I've seen some stupid claims, but that's that's a good one.
It's called.
That's got some power there.
Yeah, it's called the Holy Prepuce. Prepuce. I don't know how to pronounce that. Apparently,
I don't either.
Precipice? No, not precipice.
No, that's not a precipice.
But yeah, there's multiple ones of those. It gets more ridiculous like as you look into a bunch of these claims. But yeah, there's definitely not 8 to 21 different holy foreskins. So yeah,
some of them have got to be not legitimate. At least some of them, a non-zero number.
Yeah, so, right.
How do we discern which foreskins are credible and which are not? What's the process? Exactly. How do you guys do that? How are you going to sort that out?
The next group of claims that I really wanted to cover here are like Atlantis and lost civilization stuff. Because I know that you've kind of touched on that, especially on your YouTube channel. You've been responding to a bunch of people over there. I can't remember. Does D Dunker and the Corsetti guy, they go into the Atlantis stuff? I want to say that they do, or maybe I'm thinking of a different group of crazies.
No, I mean, kind of everybody does. I'd say if there's one like, I mean, there are a lot of different kind of threads that community pulls on, but Atlantis is like a big ball of yarn in the middle that connects a lot of them. This idea that there was some kind of advanced, however you want to define that, however they want to define it, advanced civilization during the Ice Age that was global and was destroyed in some kind of cataclysm or catastrophe, and that then became like the civilizing force or the messengers of civilization to other parts of the world. And that's an old idea that has been used in the modern era, like during colonial times, to kind of dispossess indigenous societies of their accomplishments and achievements and claims to the land that they are sitting on, especially in the New World. But it's kind of Graham Hancock's central thesis. Like, I don't know that he calls it Atlantis anymore, but he's still talking about like a global kind of earth-girding, navigating civilization that you can find traces of in mythology all around the world and architecture all around the world. And other kinds of like traces of technology and domestication and things like that. The problem is that a lot of those ideas come pretty much in the same wrapping as they did in the mid 1800s, and we have learned so much more about the past than we knew then, that they don't hold a lot of water anymore. Like, it's so easy to demonstrate why these ideas can't possibly be true or the claims can't be true. But those guys ignore all that stuff for the most part. But yeah, so that's like, Graham Hancock is kind of the central figure in that. Obviously, he had 2 seasons of his own show on Netflix. He's had some best-selling books. And then he's got some of these little hangers-on apologists who like kind of run after him and, do kind of the pit bull function, I guess. And they are what they are. What can I say?
So you mentioned like the ancient civilization sort of conspiracy theorists and how they're trying to connect all of these common threads together. But I'm kind of curious, from an archaeological perspective, what evidence would we expect to find if there was an ancient civilization like Atlantis that was so sufficiently like advanced and everything like that it that it, I guess, spread out across the world?
Well, you would expect to find all kinds of evidence for that we do not have. I'll take you back in history a little bit. In the late 1800s, Ignatius Donnelly was writing about his ideas of Atlantis, and he was connecting the dots between pyramid-shaped buildings that are found in the New World and in the Old World, and saying they must have had a common source. And that's this kind of hyper-diffusionistic framework where you assume that innovation happens one time and then it spreads out, and that the civilized people are the innovators and they are spreading their innovations to the non-civilized people, or they're colonizing it directly or whatever. In Donnelly's day, you could argue charitably that idea made sense, or that claim made sense, because there are these pyramid-shaped buildings all over the world, and like, how do you understand what those similarities are? But now we know that they date to all different time periods, that the ones in the New World are not the same age as the ones in the Old World. So now that we have radiocarbon dating and we have a lot more sophisticated understanding of the developments in these cultures and how things change, we know that they're not synchronous in time, which is what you would expect, right? You would expect all of these buildings to be at around the same time or all predate, the destruction of Atlantis, and they don't. They don't at all. And in fact, the ones in the New World are later on in the Holocene. And the ones in Egypt, which that's, if you look at some of the Egypt stuff, people want the Sphinx to be like 11,000 years old and to have water erosion on the sides of it. And that's because they want it to date back to the Ice Age. They want it to be like a marker of that Ice Age civilization. But in fact, it doesn't, and neither do the pyramids. So these things are all built after the supposed destruction of Atlantis. Another thing that Donnelly didn't know, like back in the mid-1800s, we did not have maps of the seafloor that were any good at all. So, Plato was saying that Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean. Nobody knew what was at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. There was no theory of plate tectonics. Nobody understood how the continents formed and moved. Now we know that there's the mid-Atlantic ridge, which is volcanic, and the continents are actually spreading apart. And there is no lost continent down there. There are some peaks and volcanoes that come up, but the geology says that that's not possible. So we know more about time. We know more about geology. We know more about processes of domestication. If there was this Atlantean civilization, my first question to them is, what were they eating? And Flint Dibble actually asked Graham Hancock that question on Joe Rogan. what were they eating? And he said, I don't know. But somehow they taught domestication. They brought the idea of domestication to all these other places around the world, in Graham Hancock's view, with different crops. So wheat, barley, and rye in the Near East, maize, quinoa, I guess, in the New World. The problem is with archaeological data, again, we see the domestication happening independently in different places in the world at different times with really, really long sequences from wild plants into domesticated plants. As hunter-gatherer groups are using these plants and kind of bringing them into their system. The plants become dependent upon humans, and humans become dependent upon the plants. Like, we can see all that unfold over thousands of years in Mesoamerica and thousands of years in the Near East, not connected at all, occurring at two totally different times. I mean, all in the Holocene, all since the Ice Age, but not because somebody brought a basket of seeds and said, here, start gathering this plant, and in 5,000 years, you'll be able to grow it in the field. Like, that's not how domestication works at all. So, like, we would expect to see that. We would expect to see synchrony in architecture. We would expect it to date to a certain time. We would expect to have actual concrete evidence that all these things happened at the same time and came from a single source. And we do not see any of that at all. And we would expect to see evidence of places where Atlantis was colonizing, like on the coasts of Europe and South America and the New World. And Graham Hancock is correct that since the sea level rose, a lot of those places are underwater now, so you can't see them. But the fact is, we have evidence of hunter-gatherer civilizations or hunter-gatherer societies living in all of these places that were interacting with the coast and doing other things. And there's no evidence of any kind of Atlantean technology or architecture or trade goods or any of the metals they would have been using or any of that. So we have positive evidence of people using the coast at that time that have absolutely nothing to do with any kind of advanced Ice Age civilization or metallurgy or any of that. And we have no evidence to the contrary. There's none. And the Graham Hancock answer will be, well, you haven't looked everywhere. There's still places you haven't looked. Maybe it's in the Sahara, or maybe it's someplace else. And, so maybe Atlantis is in my backyard because I haven't looked there yet for Atlantis. I haven't turned over all of those logs and stones. So that's going to be the argument forever, is that it's out there, you just haven't found it. But in the places where we have looked, the evidence makes absolutely no sense. And in fact, it points in a completely different direction of relatively independent developments in different parts of the world at different times, which are this fascinating tapestry of how humans do these kind of things, which is a patterned kind of phenomena, but varies by time and by place. And that's what archaeologists study, like the real history that unfolded, and not this garbage that was a bunch of white guys who were out there showing, as Graham Hancock puts it, the jungle Indians how to do cool stuff.
Wait, does he literally use that label, the jungle Indians?
Yeah, so I don't want to misquote him, but there's something in one of his books where he was talking about the Maya and their sophisticated timekeeping system. And he said, like, what use would these jungle-dwelling Indians have, or what use or capability would they have to create such a thing, or something like this? And, a lot of people will say, well, Graham Hancock, like white supremacists like Graham Hancock, but he's not really a racist. And so, okay. But he says things that I think pretty clearly cross that line, that, it's like you can picture him in a pith helmet, as a European colonizer, like talking about the jungle dwelling Indians, with, so yeah, I mean, that kind of language is there. And it's a symptom of that same thinking that has been passed down since the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, of these people couldn't possibly have done this themselves, and that's why we can colonize them.
Yeah, and I want to say, I remember from your talk, it's been, I've slept since BajaCon, but I want to say that during your talk, you actually mentioned this connection between these kinds of conspiracy theories and like white supremacy. Could you refresh my memory on that connection there? Because it seems like there's definitely a connection, especially with Graham Hancock in that area.
Yeah. So, I mean, historically, and I just learned this recently because I didn't know that it went back this far. But in the 1500s, there was a Spanish writer, I think he was Spanish or Portuguese, that was talking about how the New World must have been part of Atlantis, and therefore Spain has a claim to it because good Christians don't just go and take land from other people. Like there has to be a reason, and this was obviously a European civilization to begin with. So therefore, we can make a claim to it. That sort of thinking like continues on, and into the 1800s. This Spanish British colonization of the world kind of rested on this fundamental principle that like white Europeans are capable of civilization in a way that other peoples of the world are not. Your brown skinned people in Africa, your Native Americans, other peoples around the world. So therefore, we are actually doing these folks a favor by colonizing them and giving them the gifts of civilization. So the Atlantis narrative was just kind of like one kernel that kind of was in that same framework, in terms of like, if you find evidence of civilization someplace else that where there are not white Europeans living now, like what's the explanation for that? Either these people here who we are trying to colonize are already civilized, in which case we shouldn't colonize them, or that civilization predates them and maybe it was somebody else other than them and they don't have any more claim to the land than we do. And so like that was the framework. Like Atlantis provided that homeland for that initial colonizing population of Aryans, which was a really popular term to use at the time, who were white, who were the sons of Noah, Japheth, the descendants of Japheth, who repopulated the world. So that's where it comes from. And, the Nazis were big into that idea too, that Aryans were the superior race and they were responsible for all the gifts of civilization. They were the only people capable of civilizing the world. And, that mixing with other races was a problem. And that's where you get, the eugenics movement was tied into that. Also, not necessarily like explicitly to Atlantis, but to this idea that of white supremacy, which Atlantis was also tied into that in a lot of ways. And I think in my talk, I gave an example of a quote where there was a white supremacist talking about how he really liked Ancient Apocalypse because it was a way to introduce his friends to like racially based history in a way that was not saying, here, watch this Himmler video, but, we'll watch Graham Hancock instead because it's not so overt, but it still resonates with those ideas. So again, is that Graham Hancock's target audience? I don't think so. But do they like him? Yes, they do. And if it were me and I found that I had a bunch of Nazi fanboys, which I don't, but I would be curious about that. And I would wonder what it was that I was saying that like appealed to this demographic so much, and I don't know whether he has that curiosity or not. He has tried to disavow it. But in fact, there's this long history of these white supremacist kind of thought chains about history that depend on civilizations around the world being the result of white people and not indigenous people. It's like kind of fundamental to that. And wherever the source of those white people is, varies. But Atlantis is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's almost like a shield that they use to like protect themselves from like any kind of criticism. People like Graham Hancock, I mean, like they try to remain ignorant about the white supremacist sort of origins of their ideas, and they're just like, look, I'm just looking at what the archaeology says, or I'm just looking at what the science says, and the science says this thing. And I find that that's similar to like how the very conservative white supremacist white Christian nationalists in America are trying to present like faulty statistics about how African Americans in America are like somehow more violent and they commit more violent crimes and all this other stuff. So it's like they try to use like statistics as like this shield that's like, look, I'm not being racist, I'm just looking at the numbers. It kind of seems like the exact same thing with Graham Hancock and his particular position.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something there. And so I'll make 2 points. like one of the things that the Nazis did was they looked for swastikas all over the world, because the swastika is actually a very ancient symbol that appears in the New World and all different parts of the Old World. And they adopted that symbol because they could then make an argument that this was the symbol of this great Aryan civilization that we are now going to revitalize or reconstruct or rebuild or whatever. So they were really into finding swastikas. So you can make an argument now that, like, yeah, the swastika, like, obviously, you know, it got a bad name during World War II for good reason, but you find it all over India. Like, it is an ancient symbol. People who are going down that same road and going, like, let's go find this swastika, and therefore that's going to show us where the ancient Ice Age civilization, like the spread of it, like, you wonder why they're doing that, like why they picked that particular piece of evidence. You know, they can throw their hands up and say, this is just an ancient symbol, and, you know, Hitler gave it a bad name, and I'm just going to go where the evidence leads me. But at the same time, you got to ask, like, why are you going down that path? Like, why are you choosing that one, which we know doesn't make any sense, you know, to follow along? And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is, like, physical anthropology starts in the 1800s with, like, the measuring of skulls. And that turns into something called scientific racism, where, like, they're measuring the capacity of skulls, and they're saying that, you know, white Europeans skulls look like this and the rest of the world looks like this, and this explains why we're so much more intelligent, and, you know, these people can't be civilized. And it was part of the arguments for that helped prop up slavery and things like that. So American physical anthropology started off as a really, really racist endeavor, with, again, that veneer of, like, we're just following the data. We're just going to fill all these skulls with mustard seeds. We're going to see which ones are bigger, because obviously brain size correlates with intelligence and other ability. So, like, our field has to grapple with that, you know, kind of in its past, as to where we came from. But, like, that sort of thinking in the 1800s, super, super common. Like, I would say it was more common to be a racist in the 1800s than not to be one. And not only to be a racist, but probably to be pretty proud of it. You know, so it was in science, it was in politics and society and economy and everything else, in a way that thankfully it is not anymore. But to go back and borrow that science and accept it without trying to understand that, like, that's the framework they were in, like, is a mistake, because those conclusions that they came to were so overtly biased by what they wanted to be true, in the same way as you're talking about, you know, showing these statistics and figures, like, you're trying to prove a point, but then you're saying, like, well, I'm just going where the data lead. Like, I don't have any, you know, I don't have any stake in this. This is just what the data show. But obviously you've got an interpretation already out there that you want. And so that's another red flag that I would be very cautious of. When people kind of harken back to the good old days before censorship and political correctness, and, like, people were allowed to say these kind of things, it's like, yeah, they but look at the context of what their belief systems were that they were saying those things in. And data do not speak for themselves. I had an advisor at the University of Michigan who said that, you know, he said he would go into a room full of skulls and he'd stand there silently, and none of them ever said anything. And that's true. The data do not speak for themselves. You have to ask questions of the data, and what those questions are sometimes can predetermine what the answer is or how you interpret it. So you have to be really careful, I think. You know, 2 inches is still 2 inches no matter how you measure it, but, like, the water that you're asking that 2 inches to carry varies a lot, I think, depending on what your perspective is.
Yeah. And to round out this discussion on Atlantis and lost civilizations and everything like that, I've noticed in conspiracy theories that they really like to appeal to, I guess, old knowledge. Like in the context of Atlantis and lost civilizations, they appealed to Plato and him mentioning Atlantis, 2,000 years ago or so, over 2,000 years ago. Like they appeal to that as if this is like more reliable than our current understanding of reality and our current understanding of our world even. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on this appeal to like old knowledge or outdated information, or maybe sort of like an appeal to I don't know if it's tradition or whatnot, but like just this appeal to old knowledge that hasn't been updated since like its inception.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had a articulate, smooth answer to that, because like my first thing I was thinking of when you said that was like, it's frustrating. It's frustrating as hell because we do know so much more than we used to, so much more about, the way the world works, nature, the earth, human societies. This idea that somebody like Plato writes something down when, the world of the Greeks was North Africa and the Mediterranean and a little bit over into the Middle East, and that was it. That's all they knew about the world. And there were so many other Greek scientists who were very smart people who were wrong about so many things. The fact that we're going to privilege that second or third hand account and say that everything in there is factual, and it doesn't matter what all the evidence tells us now that these things couldn't possibly be true. He had the Atlanteans coming in and defeating, or no, it was the Athenians defeated the Atlanteans. There was a war between Atlantis and Athens. Athens didn't exist in 10,000 BC or 12,000 BC or 50,000 BC when Atlantis existed. Like it makes no sense at all. But to go to like say like, yeah, there's almost like it's almost like a, make knowledge great again kind of thing, that we're going to go back to before all of this corruption from the elites and the scientists who have taught us all these things, science, which makes it possible for me to fly in a plane across the continent in a few hours, or to refrigerate things when it's 90 degrees outside, like, take pictures or talk to you using O's and ones. Like, we're going to say that none of that stuff really matters, and we're going to go with Plato. But we're only going to go with the parts of Plato that we like. We're going to put Atlantis, if you draw a dot on the globe, every place where people have said they have found Atlantis around the world, like the world is covered. Every place has been found to be Atlantis. So if Atlantis can be anywhere and he's wrong about the location in the Atlantic Ocean, like at what point do we say, well, that's not Atlantis anymore? He's got all this evidence of metalworking and metallurgy, and people like Graham Hancock will say, well, that's not necessarily the kind of civilization I'm talking about. Well, then he was wrong. Like, why are you allowed to pick just part of the myth and say that that part is absolutely spot on and he was right and we should believe him? But the rest of this, just because it doesn't fit with what I say, like, we're just not going to pay any attention to that, So, there were elephants on Atlantis. Like, there's all kinds of like details about this that don't make any sense. They like the idea that maybe it was, a myth or a tale told about something that would explain all of these kind of things. But I think just like when you dig down and scratch at all, it just falls apart so utterly in the face of evidence and all that we know today, that I do not understand why we would privilege that as a literal truth when it just kind of stands alone in history as one writing. And I think it's got to be because it provides a convenient piece to the puzzle of where all these civilizations came from that can't possibly be indigenous. I mean, that's why it resurfaced in the 1800s, because it provided that key piece of like, oh, well, this would work. Here's some support for this. So that helps explain it. So.
No, yeah, I totally see that. And, in my own interaction with conspiracy theorists, it seems like they're very, I guess, pushed away by the current, scientific understanding of the world, because it's not fantastical. Like, it's very based in reality. And I think that, kind of calling back to earlier in our interview here, I just think that people want to believe in fantastical things, and these this old information that we're talking about, either Plato or any of the other cosmological sort of claims of ancient peoples, like, these are things that are fantastical that people would love to be true, and so like that's why they appealed to it. That's why it already appeals to like what they want to be true. Kind of, yeah, I believe that you were saying this earlier, is like these are things that they want to be true, but like as a scientist, as somebody that bases their views in scientific methodology, it's not about what we want to be true, it's about what's actually true about reality.
Yeah, I will go to my grave thinking it's important to get the past right. And like I I like fantasy worlds too. Like I'm a fan of science fiction. I like reading it. I like watching it. I like zombie worlds and post-apocalyptic tales and stuff like that. Um, but that's not reality. So I wish there was Bigfoot. Like that would be that would be great if that existed. But like as a scientist, like I have not seen any piece of positive evidence that convinces me that that's true. And I'm not going to pretend that that's true because I want it to be true. Um, so like I get it, I get the appeal in fantasy. I guess I would just urge people to understand that fantasy has that kind of fantasy has a pretty ugly history in a lot of ways, and there's a cost to it. Scientists are not trying to create some kind of world that didn't exist in order to disprove the Bible or anything like that. Like we are doing the best that we can to understand the human past and the natural past because we think it's important to do so. And you may not understand all the tools that we use, but I think most professional scientists are honest people and good people, and we're not making money hand over fist doing this. We don't have some kind of a agenda. Um, I guess now it'd be harder to say that it's a government agenda because look at our government. But I would urge people to, I guess, think carefully about how you know what you know, and it's fun to think about how things might be, but try to figure out what's a credible interpretation of the past and what's not, how things actually were. And that'll help us figure out where we are today and where we're going in the future. And that's one of the main reasons why we do archaeology and anthropology, is to understand the human past throughout all of its time and in all of its intricacies and complexities. And it's tough. It's much tougher than, waving your arms around and proclaiming conspiracy theory. But it's hard work, and I think it's important work, and in a way, I think it's noble work, and that's why I do it. And I think that's why a lot of my colleagues do it also.
Yeah, and I have to say the current way, at least American society is going. I remember seeing just a short TikTok on this was, the creator started off saying, "Is anybody else worried that everything is happening just like World War II again?" And then he goes through several examples in a very comedic way of like, oh, this happened. Yes, that's exactly like what happened in World War II. And it's like, you continue going on through our current situation, how that compares to World War II. And I guess my entire point is that like understanding like our past, like through archaeology or other endeavors, is important to understand what not to do in the future and how to progress and do better, like as a society. And I agree that I think it is very noble work to be in archaeology. I didn't have the spoons for doing that. I was more engineer, kind of person. But I've always enjoyed the archaeological sort of field in general. It's always been very interesting to me.
Me too. We agree.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that's kind of all the questions that I had about that. I'm sure that I could sit here and pick your brain about so many more things, but I just want to give you the last kind of word here. Do you want to, shill your channel one more time? Let everybody know like who you are, what you do, and everything like that. And then any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to say but you didn't get a chance to say?
Sure. So again, my YouTube channel is Nobody Listens to Andrew. I do The YouTube thing for me is it's not even a hustle. It's just a side. So I'll sometimes I'll do like several videos really quickly, and then you won't hear from me for months. And I also talk about other parts of my life because it's my channel. I'll talk about whatever I want to, but a lot of it has to do with pseudoarchaeology. One topic that we didn't get into here, which I think is fascinating, which if you ever want to have me back again, is the whole Nephilim thing, which is, tied to Old Testament and Bible. And like, it's crazy. If Atlantis is one big ball with threads, like the Nephilim is like, right, there's like two balls right next to each other. And one of them is Atlantis and one is the Nephilim, I would say. Keep that image in your head. The two giant balls of pseudoarchaeology. And that ties into ancient aliens and other stuff too. So I guess we focus most on one testicle today. And we'll do
the other we need to box the other testicle later.
Yeah. It's mind blowing and crazy. So I don't know, in terms of final words, like, everybody stay safe and protect yourselves, try to stay sane, and learn what you can and look for other sources. Try to, I know not everybody is going to have the technical skills to like really evaluate hardcore archaeology stuff, but I think a lot of it actually is understandable if you want to get into it. And there are a lot of kind of secondary sources where people talk about things. So look at these claims critically when you hear them. That's all that I ask. And I think if you're honest with yourself and try to understand what it is that's appealing about it, maybe you can separate the fantasy appeal from the reality, which would be a win for everyone, because a lot of this stuff is garbage and it's useful to understand it, but it has some pretty ugly parts of it that go far back into the past. And it's useful to know those things and to know what rabbit hole you're going down, I guess, before you decide that you want to live there. That's what I got.
Yeah, no, totally. I can't echo that, more. I think that's very important. So thank you so much there, Dr. White, for joining me today for this interview. Everybody that's watching right now, if you've made it this far, you've enjoyed the conversation, definitely go subscribe.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. Go subscribe to Andrew's channel here. Nobody listens to Andrew. I'm going to have it linked down below, and I will also have any other relevant links for any of Andy's stuff down there. So definitely follow all that stuff, and I guess we will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.